and Shannon Bream, of course, is up next. Shannon, what was your favorite David Cassidy song? There has to be one.
Does he sing the one, I think I love you, so what am I so afraid of? I don't know.
All of our crew here has been humming that the entire hour, and it takes you back to a simpler time. But we are all looking forward to your show, and you're coming on with me tomorrow night to talk about Thanksgiving traditions, and I understand you have some interesting ones, so I can't wait to watch your show tonight.
I'm bringing a live turkey. I just want to warn you in advance, Laura.
Everyone's pardoned.
Excellent.
Have a good show.
Thank you, Laura. And by the way, here's what we have coming up tonight.
President Trump breaks his silence on the Alabama Senate race.
We don't need a liberal person in there.
The president may even campaign for Roy Moore, the Alabama Republican facing accusations he sexually abused girls in their teens.
Let me just tell you, Roy Moore denies it.
While top Democrats face new allegations of sexual harassment and the House Ethics Committee gets involved.
I just heard about Conyers 2 minutes ago.
Chris Stirewalt on whether the dam of secrecy is finally breaking on congressional sexual harassment. And Republican Study Chairman Mark Walker explains where the GOP goes next with Judge Moore, now that the president's weighed in. Plus, a Fox News exclusive with Amy Britton, the Washington Post reporter who broke the Charlie Rose scandal. And Alan Dershowitz on whether special counsel Robert Mueller has gone far beyond his authority in the Russian probe. It's all here tonight.
Hello and welcome to Fox News at Night. I'm Shannon Bream in Washington, and this is a Fox News alert. Judge Roy Moore is speaking out late tonight, answering questions and denying once again all the accusations against him. It comes on the heels of remarks by President Trump, who's now preparing for the Thanksgiving holiday at his Mar-a-Lago residence in West Palm Beach, Florida, having left behind a political maelstrom affecting both major political parties. Republicans and Democrats soul-searching tonight as they come to grips with unfolding sexual harassment scandals. For top Democrat John Conyers, now facing allegations involving a second accuser, Democrats reportedly stopping short of demanding he step down from a powerful committee. Conyers defending himself tonight in a statement that sounds remarkably similar to the president's justification for stepping in to support Judge Roy Moore. Congressman Conyers, a prominent Michigan Democrat, says about the accusations he's facing that what's equally important to keep in mind in this particular moment is the principle of due process, and that those accused of wrongdoing are presumed innocent unless and until an investigation establishes otherwise. We've got team coverage of the president's statements about Alabama Judge Roy Moore, which are sparking backlash tonight, and the allegations facing top Democrats here in Washington. Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel will have the latest developments from Capitol Hill, but we begin with Ellison Barber on how the president's comments are impacting the Alabama Senate race. Good evening, Ellison.
Good evening, Shannon. President Trump isn't quiet often, but he was when it came to Roy Moore. In fact, Trump's only comments on the controversial candidate came through his press team until today when he stopped to speak with reporters on the South Lawn.
Yeah, I'll be talking. I can tell you one thing for sure. We don't need a liberal person in there, a Democrat. Jones, I've looked at his record. It's terrible in crime. It's terrible in the border. It's terrible in the military. I can tell you for a fact, we do not need somebody that's going to be bad on crime, bad on borders, bad with the military, bad for the Second Amendment.
Moore's opponent is Doug Jones, a former U.S. attorney known for prosecuting two Klansmen involved in the 1963 bombing of a Birmingham church. When asked about Trump's comments today, Jones said his record, quote, speaks for itself. Moore, a former state judge, is accused of making inappropriate and sometimes unwanted advances on at least 8 women. Most of the women say they were in their teens at the time, and Moore was in his 30s. One accuser says she was 14 when Moore kissed and touched her.
Well, he denies it. Look, he denies it. I mean, Roy Moore denies it. And by the way, he gives a total denial. And I do have to say, 40 years is a long time. He's run 8 races, and this has never come up. So 40 years is a long time. The women are Trump voters. Most of them are Trump voters. All you can do is you have to do what you have to do. He totally denies it.
Now, during the campaign, over a dozen women accused then-candidate Trump of sexual harassment or sexual assault. Trump denied all of those accusations. A reporter mentioned them today.
What is your message to women, sir, during this pivotal moment in our country where we are talking about sexual misconduct? You had your own allegations against you.
Let me just tell you, Roy Moore denies it. I think it's a very special time because a lot of things are coming out, and I think that's good for our society, and I think it's very, very good for women. And I'm very happy a lot of these things are coming out, and I'm very happy it's being exposed.
Now the question seems to be, will the president go to Alabama and campaign for Moore? When asked, Trump left that door open. He said he'll let us know next week. Shannon?
All right, so Ellison, I understand that Moore sat down with a radio host in Alabama tonight. He again denied the allegations. He's done that from the beginning. Now, he also talked about this question of whether he's going to take legal action. Any news on that front tonight?
Yeah, right. He adamantly again denied all of these allegations. He said he doesn't know any of these women, and in his words, certainly didn't do anything to them. When it comes to possible legal action, he says they're talking about it, but it takes time. Listen.
We're talking about the Washington Post. We're talking about the women involved. Mm-hmm. You know, it takes time to develop a case. There's another side to it. If they are allowed to do things without any substantiation or any proof and put the burden of defense on the person, that's a terrible burden, I'll tell you. And I'll tell you, I didn't have any wrongful relationship. I never dated underage women, and I never engaged in sexual misconduct with anybody.
Moore's wife, Kayla, also appeared on the show. Shannon, she's been a staunch defender of her husband throughout all of this.
All right, Ellison, thank you very much for that update. Busy night. Well, the president also briefly responded to questions about the sexual harassment allegations facing Democrats, Congressman John Conyers and Senator Al Franken. Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel is following the very latest. It's changing minute by minute. He's on Capitol Hill with more on that. Hey, Mike.
Shannon, good evening. Before taking off for the Thanksgiving holiday with the first family, President Trump spoke about the wave of sexual misconduct issues. That includes two prominent Democrat lawmakers, Minnesota Senator Al Franken and Michigan Congressman John Conyers.
I'm very happy a lot of these things are coming out, and I'm very happy it's being exposed.
Should Al Franken resign now? Because
I don't know. Look, I don't want to speak for Al Franken. I don't know what happened. I just heard about Conyers 2 minutes ago. As far as Franken's concerned, he's going to have to speak for himself.
The latest revelation about Conyers, according to BuzzFeed, is a former scheduler filed suit against him in federal court, claiming she suffered unwanted touching by the congressman, quote, repeatedly and daily. The leading Democrats on the House Judiciary Committee behind Conyers, New York's Gerald Nadler and California's Zoe Lofgren, have both called for an ethics investigation. And the House Democratic leader also supports an ethics probe into Conyers.
I do know that this is zero tolerance, and as a mother of 4 daughters and 1 son, as a grandmother, just as a woman, as I've said to the speaker, we've got to move this faster because there's a tipping point, and there's no question. What is the discussion?
There is also outrage over the Congressional Office of Compliance revealing 17 million taxpayer dollars have been used to settle 264 claims over 20 years.
Was surprised to hear there was a hush money fund, if you will, and I hope that comes to an end today. If there's been bad behavior, it should be dealt with by the individuals that have exercised poor judgment and bad behavior. That is taxpayer dollars, and I think it's absolutely disgusting.
And on that point, there appears to be at least some bipartisan agreement. There are some suggestions these sexual harassment allegations involving members of Congress are only the tip of the iceberg, and there's an active push to reveal the names of lawmakers who have settled sexual harassment claims against them. Shannon?
All right, Mike Emanuel live with us tonight on all of the doings on Capitol Hill. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, top national Republicans have called on Judge Moore to step aside, but that wasn't exactly the message from the president today. So how does the GOP handle the controversy? Congressman Mark Walker of North Carolina joins us live. He chairs the Republican Study Committee, a caucus of more than 150 House conservatives. Great to have you live with us tonight.
Shannon, thanks. Glad to be here.
This is something that seems to reach across the political spectrum. There are bad actors all across on both sides of the aisle. How do you think we got here?
Well, I don't think this has anything to do with Republican or Democrat. Specifically in this case, I've watched over the years, and I spent 18 years as a pastor before arriving to Congress, now in my second term. Very privileged to chair the RSC, and I've talked with some of the guys. When you surround yourself with people who a lot of times tell you how great you are every day, you begin to believe that hype. Specifically in the Roy Moore situation, there were two pivotal moments. When Sean Hannity asked him a week and a half ago, did you date high school girls? And he said, generally, no. That was a flag. And then I watched the full 8 minutes of the Savannah Guthrie interview of Miss Gorfman there. That's a very powerful testimony, and it should be concerning to us all.
So where do you think you go with this then? Because the president said today, hey, listen, he denies all of this, and he talked about his opponent saying we don't need another liberal. I mean, obviously that vote, if the Democrat is seated, hurts his agenda, whether it's taxes, repealing Obamacare, or anything else. It sounds like he's at least open maybe to the idea of actually campaigning for more.
Well, it's something that I wouldn't be comfortable with. Certainly the president is allowed to make his own decision there. But I believe, ultimately, I think where we do agree is that people from Alabama, was actually born there, but people of Alabama should actually make this decision based on the facts that they have seen. We can't one time say, hey, federal should not intervene in this situation, but intervene in this certain election. This is their nominee, and they will decide this at the polls. But I do find the information that we've seen troubling at this point.
Okay, so now we have allegations against Congressman John Conyers. He is a very well-respected civil rights icon, decades in the House. Some people think this is an example of where term limits are maybe not such a bad idea, because there are a lot of folks up on the Hill that, as you said, you can become comfortable. He's denying all the allegations, but here's what we have from the House Ethics Committee. They say the committee is aware of public allegations that Representative John Conyers Jr. may have engaged in sexual harassment of members of his staff, discriminated against certain staff on the basis of age, and used official resources for impermissible personal purposes. The committee has begun an investigation and will gather additional information regarding these allegations. Congressional Black Caucus also weighing in, saying no matter the perpetrator, no matter the victim, those responsible for sexual harassment and/or sexual assault must be held accountable. We encourage and expect Mr. Conyers to cooperate fully with any and all investigations into this matter. Do you feel, are you confident there is a framework in place in Congress to hold people accountable when this happens?
I can't honestly say that at this point there is the framework to hold this accountable. If many of us in Congress, those of us serving in our second term or 40 years, are just now finding out there's this slush hush money fund where $17 million have been paid out, listen, we're already tracking somewhere between a 17 and 20% approval rating. And beyond just the approval rating, this is a moral injustice for people, taxpayers' dollars, to be able to be provided and paid out to some of these people who obviously have had rogue behavior. Now, I want these people outed. At the same time, and I'm reflecting again on the pastoral history, you want to make sure that you don't out some of the victims. This is a very sensitive time, so you have to be able to draw that fine line to make sure that people are being exposed without creating any more damage that's already been done to some of these victims.
I know a lot of what happens, like with the House Ethics Committee and other investigative bodies, until they decide to release a report, it is confidential information. The same thing we're hearing about this slush fund, which those claims weren't all sexual harassment in nature. They were other workplace issues. But for those who have been accused of this kind of behavior, and there's been some finding, a settlement or wrongdoing, in what cases do you think those names of those members should be public?
Oh, I think they should be public, and I think they should resign. If you create a situation where taxpayers' dollars are going to pay for settlements based on your indiscretions, whether it was predatorial or whatever it might have been, you do not have the right to any longer serve in the United States Congress, albeit the House or the Senate.
Do you feel like, because there's been such a conversation over the last 10, 20 years, I would say, that we shouldn't be voting for people based on morality? People can be flawed in some of their moral and private life issues, but be excellent leaders and good politicians. Is that partially how we got here?
Probably a little bit. You go back, and I don't want to go through the talking points, but you look at the Clinton era and the defense when some of the evidence really clearly shown that there were things going on. We've seen that begin to turn now, and I hope that ultimately it puts us in a place where we have more protection for those being harassed or discriminated against. The United States Congress ought to be leading the way when it comes to integrity. Draining the swamp, when I first decided to run for Congress 3.5 years ago, I had no idea. I thought it was only from a political front. Now we see there's immoral behavior to a degree that I think surprises and shocks many of us.
Well, we're glad that you're willing to have this conversation and keep us apprised of changes and things that are happening on the Hill, because we know you are among those who are trying to have some transparency with this, regardless of party.
Listen, we're all grateful for God's grace, but that doesn't go down party lines either. So
exactly.
Yeah.
We all need it. That's
Yes.
for sure. All right, Congressman, great to have you with us. Thanks for coming in.
Certainly.
All right, military personnel, we're learning, assigned to the White House find themselves in some big trouble tonight after breaking the rules with some foreign women, we're told. 3 non-commissioned officers allegedly broke curfew when President Trump went to Asia earlier this month. During his Vietnam stopover, we're told that 3 military personnel had what the military is calling improper contact with unspecified foreign women. We're told the 3 NCOs have been reassigned while the Defense Department looks into the matter. Well, the president was not finished when he surprised reporters with his comments on Judge Moore, Senator Franken, and Congressman Conyers. The president also volunteered details of a call that he had with the Russian president, and he also said he thinks the names of members of Congress who settle sex harassment claims should be made public.
We had a great call with President Putin. We're talking about peace in Syria, very important. We're talking about North Korea. We had a call that lasted almost an hour and a half. We've just put out a release on the call, but we're talking very strongly about bringing peace to Syria. We're talking very strongly about North Korea and Ukraine. I'll be letting you know next week, but I can tell you, you don't need somebody who's soft on crime like Jones.
All right, so are we seeing just the tip of the iceberg now when it comes to these kinds of scandals on Capitol Hill, which the president finally was addressing today and talking about Judge Moore? Fox News politics editor Chris Steyerwald is here to help us break it down. Good to see you, sir.
Adam.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about what we're hearing on the John Conyers front, because I want to make sure that we include his defense here. And what he says is important to keep in mind in this particular moment is the principle of due process, and that those accused of wrongdoing are presumed innocent unless and until an investigation establishes otherwise. Now, about the claim that he settled, he said, in that case, I expressly and vehemently denied the allegations made against me and continue to do so. Goes on to say there are statutory requirements of confidentiality that apply to both the employee and me regarding this matter. So let's talk about that. I mean, the way that this is set up, it sounds like in some part it's not great for either one, because if he can't spell out his defense that he'd like to publicly and the victim can't speak publicly, how do we know the truth?
Look, you're the lawyer here. But here's what I know. You cannot regulate decency, and you cannot regulate the human spirit to rise to some higher calling. We have a situation here where, whether it's in the Conyers case, whether it's with Roy Moore, whether it was, and now we have other people looking back to Bill Clinton and lamenting that more wasn't done at the time. And I think about something, which is the death of shame really stinks. The death of shame in American public life really stinks, because the standard ceases to be what is right for me and what am I going to do, but what can I get away with, and can you prove it, and is there a smoking gun, and can I be removed? You can't stop me from running for Senate, so I'm going to run for Senate. You can't, unless you can remove me through this process. And this really hurts, because it's not that the Congress is unpopular. Who cares if Congress is unpopular? Congress isn't trusted. It's not believed in. People don't have confidence in the institutions in our government. And part of the reason they don't have confidence in the institutions of our government is that whether it's Roy Moore or John Conyers or Al Franken or whomever takes the position which basically says, if I can beat the rap, then I can do it. I can do whatever I want.
So what conundrum does this now pose for the parties? Because there are some today saying, okay, are Democrats going to call for Conyers to step down from his seat on the Judiciary Committee? Is Franken going to be pressured to resign? They're both apparently going to the ethics committees of their respective houses. If Roy Moore wins and comes here, there are Republicans who are distancing and saying we're going to get rid of him. The president saying today, well, he denied everything. And by the way, Roy Moore in that interview tonight down in Alabama, very interesting comments that he had about McConnell and the others here that he thinks are completely out to get him, and that's 100% what this is all about.
Well, whatever that is, the fiction, the idea that was put forward by some Republicans, well, if Roy Moore comes here, we'll discharge him from the body. Yeah, right.
You don't think they'll do it?
With Donald Trump backing him, and you see Trump making some, I wonder if Trump doesn't have a few feelings that he experienced something like what Roy Moore is experiencing in his own campaign. The accusers with years-old accusations come forward right before the election. Somehow that should be discrediting. And Trump, there's reporting that says that Steve Bannon basically told Trump, hey, they did this to you when your accusers people came forward with credible claims. We stood up for you and said you should be president anyway. And maybe Trump has a little bit of that vibe for Moore. But the ridiculous idea that somehow the Republicans, this band of courageous, doughty folks, was somehow Roy Moore was going to arrive in the Senate and then they would all band together and discharge him. No, they want the vote.
Well, but I know that you've warned that they're going to be wearing him in 2018 if he gets here and they don't do something like that.
If this tax bill smelled like snickerdoodle cookies and gave everybody in America a free unicorn, there would be no tax bill that would be worth, in terms of just an electoral consequence, what it would be like to have to basically campaign with a cutout of Roy Moore next to you for the next year and a half.
I'll take the snickerdoodle cookies, but not the unicorn, because that sounds like a lot of maintenance.
Messy.
Okay. Good to see you, Chris.
Hey, bye.
Thank you. All right, stick around. The reporter who broke the Charlie Rose story joins us live next, and she's got new developments on the disgraced newsman. Also coming up, the Trump administration takes new action on sanctuary cities. At the same time, a federal judge is trying to shut down the president. We'll debate it coming up. Tonight, the man behind the seemingly endless series of animated hits by Disney's Pixar Studios, John Lasseter, says he's temporarily stepping away after admitting to, quote, missteps. And media reports claim that's about inappropriate workplace behavior by Lasseter. It comes the same day that CBS and PBS have formally fired newsman Charlie Rose. An extensive report by the Washington Post detailed 8 women who said they were sexually harassed by Rose. The 75-year-old issued an apology. One of his CBS This Morning female colleagues said there's no excuse for this alleged behavior. Washington Post reporter Amy Britton, who helped break this story, joins us now live. Good to have you with us tonight.
Thank you for having me.
How did this story come to be? How did it come together?
Well, it came together with my colleague, Ren Carmone. She first heard about some of these allegations back in 2010. And she tried to report the story then and was unable to complete her reporting. She came to the Washington Post recently with some additional information. We joined together and we have spent the last 20 days pretty much working nonstop on this report.
How worried were these women, or anxious to tell their stories, to talk to you on the record?
I would say that they were extremely worried. A lot of them were very fearful about the possible repercussions of speaking out against someone with the power and stature of a man like Charlie Rose. We had extensive conversations with them, some of them in person, some of them over the phone, that spanned hours. We spent weeks talking with these women, and in many cases, they were weighing whether to go on the record or not go on the record. One woman who ultimately made the decision to go on the record told me that the reason that she made that decision was because she did not want to live in a place of fear of him anymore. And not being willing to put her name on the record would be living in a place of fear, and she wanted to be in a place of power.
Okay, now so many of these stories, what we're hearing after the fact is some people say, it was a well-known, talking point, everybody kind of knew about this, and others will say, I'm stunned, this is not the version of that person that I saw. I want to play a little bit of what one of his colleagues, Gayle King, from the CBS Morning Show, had to say about him today.
I'm really struggling because what do you say when someone that you deeply care about has done something that is so horrible? How do you wrap your brain around that? I'm really grappling with that. That said, Charlie does not get a pass here. He doesn't get a pass from anyone in this room. We are all deeply affected. We are all rocked by this.
What do you make of this contrast where some of the women in these men's lives will say, I never saw a hint of this, and others are these young women who say that they felt very vulnerable and afraid of him? I mean, it's almost like a Jekyll and Hyde with some of these guys.
It is, and I will say, in talking with these women, there were striking commonalities in their stories, and these are women in many cases who do not know one another, and they worked for him at very different points in their lives. And I will say that there were some similarities, I would say, in the vulnerability that they had at the moment that they were working for him whenever he started making these advances. They were young. Some of them were his assistants. So they would be called out to his apartment, to his home, to be alone with him. He would insist that they needed to spend time, like in cars with him, to learn how to travel with him, to be around him. So I think that maybe for some of the people who didn't know about it, perhaps they were in positions of greater power. It seemed like most of the individuals that we spoke to who were subject to this type of behavior were in positions of vulnerability.
Did you get the impression, too, that many of these women thought at the time that it was just them? They didn't know about others, and that's also very isolating.
That was a really heartbreaking part of reporting this story, is that I remember one woman was speaking to me late one night, and she said, I have something to tell you, something that happened to me. And she said, I was working with him alone in his apartment, and he came out and he was naked in front of me. And I told her, I said, you know, you're not the only one. And she gasped, and she said, for all these years, I just thought I was the only one. And in some ways, she felt reassured that she wasn't the only one, but in another way, her heart broke that other women had been subject to the same behavior, and that this had been going on for so long.
Well, and it seems like with these stories and these reports and the story that you broke, it does change the conversation over this last few weeks for people who begin to wonder and say, maybe I'm not the only person who faced this situation, and now I can come out and share my story as well. I know that you can't give us details, but I know that you've heard from other people since the story broke as well.
We have. I will say within an hour of publishing the story yesterday, my inbox was already starting to, get full with new emails. We've had women reach out to us from years past. We're still going through those emails. We're returning phone calls, reaching out to individuals who want to share their stories as well and want to share new information. So we're still continuing our reporting.
Well, we know you're working around the clock. So Amy Britton of the Washington Post, thanks for taking a break with us.
Thank you so
Good
much.
to see you. All right, coming up, President Trump surprised reporters when he stopped to chat on his way to Mar-a-Lago. Will he do it again this evening now that he's landed there? We're going to take you live to Florida for the very latest. And later on, distinguished Harvard law professor Alan Dershowitz joins us to discuss the ever-expanding Russia investigation. You know Dershowitz, no conservative, surprising some with his views on special counsel Robert Mueller and how far he's gone. Keep it here. Like many this Thanksgiving week, President Trump and his family headed out of town. President traveled to his Florida home, Mar-a-Lago, but before departing, he took part in an annual tradition. Phil Keating joins us from Palm Beach with all the details. Hey, Phil.
Hi, Shannon. This will be the very first official Thanksgiving that the president and family spend at his Mar-a-Lago Oceanside Resort on Palm Beach. Remember, this time last year, Trump was simply president-elect. Checkpoints and road closures are already in effect, as are restrictions on flights and boating activities in and around Palm Beach, as they will be through Sunday night. Air Force One landed coming into the West Palm Beach International Airport roughly 5:45 this afternoon after some mild turbulence over the Carolinas. Other than that, it was smooth sailing. As the president, first lady, and son Barron came down to the tarmac, President Trump spent several minutes greeting supporters, taking pictures, and signing a few autographs. Then it was into the motorcade for the short drive home, and along the route, hundreds of people lined both sides of the street just to take in the spectacle. Immediately upon landing, Trump shot out his very first tweet from the Florida trip. Today, we continued a wonderful American tradition. At the White House of drumstick and wishbone will live out their days in the beautiful Blue Ridge Mountains at Gobbler's Rest. That's in Virginia. That's referring, of course, to today's Rose Garden ceremony, where two turkeys, drumstick and wishbone, received their official presidential pardons for their high crimes of being poultry, spared from the carving knife, unlike about 46 other million turkeys this year.
It was 70 years ago that the National Turkey Federation first presented the National Thanksgiving Turkey to President Harry Truman, who, I might add, did not grant the pardon. He refused. He was a tough cookie. Today, I'm going to be a much nicer president.
And we saw our very first Trump protest rally today here in West Palm Beach, which occasionally happens when the president's in town. A small group decried Trump administration's announcement that the temporary protected status visas for about 60,000 Haitians, most of whom living in South Florida, will expire in about 18 months, meaning most of them will end up going back to the island by force. As the administration says, conditions in Haiti are now better than they were actually before 2010's devastating earthquake. Now, the White House press office says there are absolutely no scheduled or expected public events from now through Sunday here in Palm Beach, so it could be a quiet one at the Palm Beach Winter White House for President Trump, just like JFK in the 1960s had his Winter White House here, and Nixon did on Key Biscayne, and Truman did on Key West. And you know, when it's a high of about 80 degrees and blue skies in November, Shannon, that's why.
I mean, somebody's got to take the assignment, Phil. So we're glad you're willing to do it this holiday week. Thank you so much.
I was going to wear it. You're welcome. Take care.
Coming up, President Trump's order to cut off funds to so-called sanctuary cities blocked by a judge who, by the way, once raised $200,000 for former President Barack Obama. Should it matter, though, the judge's politics? We'll debate that straight ahead. President Trump's proposed ban on certain funding to sanctuary cities has been blocked by a federal judge, William Orrick, who, by the way, has a long history of donating heavily to Democrats. Once credited for raising money for John Kerry's failed presidential bid and nearly $200,000 for former President Barack Obama, the judge permanently blocked the sanctuary cities order, calling it unconstitutional. So, was it politics or just justice? Here to discuss, radio host and Mediaite contributing editor Larry O'Connor and Johns Hopkins professor Wendy Osefo. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Good evening.
All right, so I want to read a little bit about what the judge said on this, because he said basically, you know, you can't tell these people you're cutting off this money they thought they were going to get. It impacts their budgets and all kinds of things. He said, in part, while the federal government may incentivize states to adopt federal programs voluntarily, it cannot use means that are so coercive as to compel their compliance. Professor, we'll let you start.
Absolutely. So I understand what the judge is saying here, right? Because at the end of the day, he said there's no way for them to enforce this. There's no way for them to say, if this is something that you bestow upon us, we're not going to be able to say, actually, you're wrong. And that is the issue here. There are no guidelines, and that's what we're talking about. It's not about his political leanings. We can't use that as a rubric to say who can and who cannot judge on an issue.
Yeah, because a lot of judges do get involved in political campaigns and those kinds of things. The judge also said this. He said the executive order doesn't direct the attorney general or secretary to provide sanctuary jurisdictions with any notice of an unfavorable designation or impending cut to funding. He said basically they have no way to appeal this. They have no way, essentially no due process, Larry, if this money gets cut off.
I'd really welcome all of my friends who are Democrats that are now embracing federalism and the 10th Amendment and the separation of powers. Where have you been the last 6 decades? But that said, you know, the beauty of our founding documents, the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, Bill of Rights, everyone can understand them. They make logical sense, Shannon. And I think for most Americans, when you see this sanctuary city policy and you see cities and counties and states deciding, yeah, we're not going to cooperate with the federal government on this. We're going to disobey that law. We're going to pick and choose what laws are valid and which laws aren't, but still give me all those federal tax dollars. It doesn't pass the smell test with most Americans, and it doesn't make sense. And to me, this judge's ruling doesn't really wash either.
Well, no surprise, the White House didn't think so either, saying this: the flawed district court ruling undercuts the president's efforts to keep the American people safe and secure by enforcing existing law. We are confident the courts will ultimately uphold the president's lawful and necessary authority. Now, the next step would be the Ninth Circuit. I believe this was in California, so Ninth Circuit, which, you know, not really. The Ninth Circuit does not love President Trump or any of his policies. So maybe this does end up at the Supreme Court. But how do you think they do at that level?
I think it will end up at the Supreme Court. Historically, the Ninth Circuit has been left-leaning. Again, you know, if we look at Judge Chung or Judge Wilson, these are 2 other judges who looked at this ban and they said, you know what, we're going to push this aside. And I think it's really important here for us to understand that it's not the fault of the judges. We have to make sure we're putting forth policies that is well-written, that has checks and balances, and that's what's void here. And I honestly believe if they are able to revise this and put in some measures of checks and balances, this could actually go through, but that's what's missing right now.
The fundamental issue here is the rogue policies of cities deciding not to follow the law. And we can talk about all the constitutional aspects and all the, you know, major issues here. Let's put a human face to this. Right here in suburban Washington, in Montgomery County, very liberal Montgomery County, Maryland, just 2 weeks ago, a young woman was murdered by a man, a co-worker at a Kentucky Fried Chicken. That man was in this country illegally. He was deported in the 90s, back when Democrats obeyed immigration laws. He came back into the country illegally. He was pulled over and stopped 2 different times by Montgomery County police for traffic infractions, but his immigration status was never investigated because of the sanctuary policy in Montgomery County, and then that man ended up murdering an innocent person. There are very real human repercussions from these policies.
There are, and I'm actually one of them. I am an immigrant. I came to this country when I was 3 years old. I'm from Nigeria. I was the first person to get a PhD in my department in 2016. So let's not paint immigrants as people who violate the law.
Legally.
Yeah, I did come here legally.
Do you not make a distinction between legal immigration and illegal immigration?
I absolutely do.
Oh, good.
But
then don't say I was painting immigrants that way, because I wasn't.
But Jeff Sessions doesn't, right? Because he has put forth policies that really speak to all immigrants and paint them with a broad brush.
Not this policy. This is very specific to illegal immigration. Can you name one policy he set forth where that paints all immigrants as the same, legal and illegal?
Absolutely. He tries to make it seem as though all immigrants, he says it. No,
that's not a policy. He tries to make it seem as though it's not a policy.
It's not a policy, but we have empirical data that says that immigrants do not commit more crimes than United States citizens. And what you say,
illegal immigrants do.
It
is true because they stay in this country illegally. They're continuing to break the law.
That is not true.
This is not a technical foul, although I'm not afraid to award that, but this is time now. I will. No, we're just getting off on a little bit of a rabbit trail, but just to be clear, the sanctuary city policy we're talking about strictly deals with illegal immigration. But we can continue the conversation another time.
We'll continue it in the green room.
Professor and Larry, good to see you both.
Always good to see you.
We'll sell tickets
Happy Thanksgiving.
And to you guys as well. All right, just ahead. Top White House aides now reportedly under the watchful eye of the special counsel, but has Robert Mueller gone too far? A leading constitutional scholar explains why he thinks the answer is now yes. Welcome back. This is a Fox News Alert. Following up on our conversation we just wrapped about sanctuary cities, our Fox 5 affiliate here in D.C. reporting now that police say an MS-13 gang member has been arrested for murder. The victim was found stabbed more than 100 times in a grave in a park in Montgomery County, Maryland. Larry O'Connor was just talking about that. More on that case later on as we learn more. Well, special counsel Robert Mueller now reportedly seeking documents from the Justice Department over President Trump's decision to fire FBI Director James Comey. It's part of an increasingly broad probe into Russian meddling in the U.S. elections. The firing raises important legal and political questions, both for Trump and Mueller. Joining us now from New York, Alan Dershowitz, Professor Emeritus at Harvard Law School, and also the author of Trumped Up: How Criminalization of Political Differences Endangers Democracy. Professor, great to have you with us tonight.
Thank you.
All right, so what do you make of what we are learning about where the special counsel is going based on the mandate he was given in the beginning?
Well, I think he's now intruding into the way the President of the United States exercises his constitutional authority. The President is entitled to fire any member of the executive branch with or without cause. The President is entitled to pardon anybody he chooses to. The President is entitled to tell the head of the Justice Department who to investigate, who not to investigate. We may not like that. We may regard that as a political sin, but it can't be a crime. Thomas Jefferson did that at the founding of our Constitution. And President Bush, the first President Bush, pardoned Caspar Weinberger as he was about to go on trial, leading the special prosecutor in that case to say the president was motivated by a desire to end an investigation that could easily have pointed to President Bush himself. So we can't be psychoanalyzing presidential motives. We have to look at their actions. And the president's actions have so far been constitutionally protected. And I think that special counsel Mueller is going much too far.
Now, you and I know, as our viewers do, that often special counsel, special prosecutors, whatever you've wanted to call it over the decades that we've had this concept, often where they start out and where they end up are very different places.
Sure.
Is there anyone, lawmakers, the Attorney General, or is there anyone who has the power to sort of rein him in if he says you're so far off course about what we thought that you were going to be doing? Or does he have the power to simply go where an investigation takes him?
No, the Deputy Attorney General has the power to rein him in. The Attorney General would, but the Attorney General has recused himself. Now, the Attorney General still has the power if the special counsel goes beyond the Russia probe, because he's only recused himself from the Russia probe, so he's still the chief law enforcement officer when it comes to other issues. For example, the first two indictments that came down, one of them had nothing at all to do with the Russia probe, and the other had little to do with it. And what the special counsel is doing is he's playing the famous game of dominoes. He's trying to find the first domino, knock him over, and maybe that'll knock over the second domino, the third, and the fourth domino. And if some of these dominoes have nothing to do whatsoever with the Russian probe, it's just an attempt to squeeze them, to get them to provide information against other people, the Attorney General could impose constraints on that. Will they? Probably not, because the political situation is such that it would cause an outcry among some members of Congress if that were to happen.
We know that they have spoken to a lot of folks close to the president, and there are more who will speak to them, we understand, after the holiday week or in the coming days. A lot of these people close to the president, some of them happen to be related to the president, his own children. How much pressure is that on the president if he has, any worry or sense that it could be one of his children who are in the crosshairs instead of him?
Well, that's the worry. The worry is that the way this domino operates is you go after people close to the president. You find them on some technicality. It could be jaywalking, or it could be failing to include a meeting in a required document. And once you have them, you can squeeze. I don't think the president has anything to worry about by his relatives, because his relatives will be loyal to him. But there are other people who might say to themselves, hey, it's either me or the president, and I'm not only going to sing, I'm going to compose, because they know that the better the evidence, the sweeter the deal they're going to get. That's the danger of this domino approach, that you can get people not only to testify truthfully, but you can get them also to exaggerate their testimony. I don't believe Mueller would do that deliberately, but the targets themselves often feel that if they can improve on the testimony, they'll get a better deal. That's very dangerous to civil liberties.
It does. Professor Dershowitz, always great to have your input. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We're back right after this. Time now for night courts. The Little Sisters of the Poor are back in court after the Trump administration rolled back the Obamacare mandate that they had to provide birth control coverage. They didn't have any time to celebrate because California and Pennsylvania sued to take away their exemption as a religious entity. Now the famous Catholic charity is asking an appeals court to stop the states. The Little Sisters attorney telling the appeals court no one needs these nuns in order to get contraceptives. Well, most trusted, most watched, and most grateful you spent the evening with us. Good night from Washington. I'm Shannon Bream.